President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced that 5 million doses of Pfizer and 10 million doses of the J&J vaccines will be donated to other African countries. Ramaphosa made the remarks during the second global COVID-19 summit at the invitation of U.S. President Joe Biden. This comes as health officials in South Africa have noted a low vaccine uptake. According to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there are over 100 million cases that have been recorded on the continent, with only 16% of the population having received the jab. For more on this, we're joined by Professor Thumbi Ndung'u, Deputy Director of the African Health Research Institute. Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. A noble gesture?
Indeed, Dudu, and good afternoon to you and to the viewers. Yes, I think this is a very good gesture. I think it does demonstrate African solidarity, and it's what scientists and in fact the global community have been calling for, people of goodwill, for vaccines not to be hoarded but rather to be shared, particularly with poor countries. So I think it is a good gesture overall. I think the question mark is whether this will actually work. And by that I mean that we know that although now the vaccines are available, vaccine uptake and demand for vaccines has been rather poor. And this is, I think, a big challenge to convince people to actually now take these vaccines.
And that's just it. You go onto the COVID-19 vaccine dashboard online. Not a single African country appears in the top 40 where at least 50% of the population is fully vaccinated. So a good gesture that might just go to waste?
I'm afraid that unless there is a concerted effort by the public health community, by governments in particular, to convince and persuade people to take up vaccines as a way to prevent COVID-19, we are going to continue to see very low vaccination rates in Africa. I think the problems are twofold. First of all, we did not act rapidly enough to roll out vaccines, and I think the global community, particularly the rich countries that have had access to these vaccines now for close to 2 years, are to blame, because when people are calling for vaccines to be distributed early on, they were not forthcoming. And then what ended up happening is that a lot of people got COVID-19, and that, of course, offers some immune protection for those people that got the infection and recovered. So that offers some protection. And therefore, that has led to this skepticism, if we may call it that way, where people feel that there is no need to take the vaccines. We are not seeing severe cases of COVID-19 as we saw in the beginning. So that also makes people wonder whether they should be taking vaccines. And then, of course, the other challenge we have is a scientific one, the fact that these vaccines seem not to be able to protect over a long period of time. So it seems like one has to take vaccines, a booster every 6 months, the immunity wanes, and that's problematic. So I think what we need is a real public health education and a concerted effort to convince people to take vaccines, because at the end of the day, vaccines are still the very best option that we have for preventing severe disease, for preventing hospitalization. So I think people do need to understand that this is a serious public health challenge that we still face, and be able to take vaccines. If we don't convince people to take our vaccines, even when they become available, we will have a problem.
Doc, you speak of the benefit of hindsight, right, and saying that we didn't act soon enough, we're blaming the West for hoarding these vaccines. But what to do when you interrogate the information that is placed before you, right? So according to the latest information from the Africa CDC, published on Thursday, the 12th of May, the total cases being 11.5 million in terms of reported cases on the continent, accounting for 3% of the total cases reported globally. the recovery rate being 10.8 million cases of people recovering. That accounts to a 94% recovery rate, only recording 252,000 deaths. So how do we reconcile this information, as you're saying, that we're not seeing severe cases? Are we also speaking in languages that people can understand the information that is being sent to them?
I think there is a need for us to rethink how we communicate the message around COVID-19. Certainly, I do think that we haven't quite been able to come up with messages that resonate broadly among the population. And there is, of course, we're also fighting against a lot of misinformation. So I think that we need to find ways that are acceptable to the populations that we serve, to the people that we live in. We ourselves, as part of these communities, we need to figure out ways to effectively communicate. There's no doubt that COVID-19 is a serious illness. It can cause severe disease and death, and one death is too many for a disease that is preventable through vaccines. So whereas it is true that not as many people in Africa seem to have died from the infection, the risk that we take is that if one of us gets it, you can, particularly if you're in a vulnerable group, you can end up dying. And this is for a disease that and for a death that can be prevented with a vaccine. So we need to find a way to communicate this for people to understand that not only are they protecting themselves, but they're also protecting their loved ones. But actually, they're also protecting potentially against the development of future variants that could be much more dangerous. So there's no doubt that vaccines are the way to go. The issue here is how do we communicate in a way that people will understand and come out so that they can get vaccinated.
Early in May, Africa's first COVID-19 vaccination plant in Gqeberha, which was touted last year as a trailblazer for an under-vaccinated continent, faces the risk of shutting down. It has not received a single order. I guess maybe that just underscores everything that we have outlined.
Yes, it underscores the problem of demand that we have. Having a plant is all well and good, but only good if people are going to actually make use of it. And if there is no demand for these vaccines, then we risk the problem of having a plant that is just a white elephant, which would be disastrous should we again face another epidemic. And make no mistake, we will face some future epidemics that require us to produce vaccines rapidly in order for us to protect ourselves against those diseases. Ebola comes to mind, and other viruses of that nature. So I think that we need to do everything we can to keep that plant going so that we can supply vaccines. And we should start with COVID-19 because that's the challenge that we are facing at the moment. As I said, I think the challenge now is for us to and communicators, all of us together as communities, as scientists, is to come with, out with messages that will resonate with the population in a way that they understand, so that they understand that they are protecting themselves, they are protecting their loved ones, and vaccines are the most efficient way to deal with this epidemic, despite what may be going out there in terms of misinformation and disinformation on social media.
Thank you very much for helping us make sense of all of that. Professor Thumbi Ndung'u, Deputy Director of African Health Research Institute.